It was very good to see my political boss there on the video earlier on, Ed Davey, who was not just leader of the Liberal Democrats, but far past Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, and some major innovations during his regime there. I'm going to try to talk, I think I had 20 minutes, but I'm going to try to just talk for 10 and then take questions if that sort of works. And let's just start with one or two things. First of all, congratulations on this conference. I must say that I was, Ufi, your chief executive, sent me some statistics, and I was absolutely horrified that the hotel and the sector was probably one of the not so good users of water nor of energy, going upwards rather than the rest of the economy going downwards. So you've got lots of opportunity for change, and congratulations on this conference. I was once a corporate economist, and I did all the Keynesian stuff when I was at university, moved on to monetarism. But one of the things I just wanted to say is that if ever nowadays, I'm a disciple of donut economics. If any of you have read Kate Raworth's book, and I would, it's very easy to look at. All you've got to do is read the first chapter, and pretty well the rest of it is the same. And it shows about boundaries in terms of the natural environment and other areas, and economic growth as well, and how that fits in it. What I'm going to do in terms of ESG is, I'm afraid, concentrate on the E, the environmental side. I'm not great on social. I believe in it all, but I'm not an expert there, and only a partial expert on the government side. So when I came into the House of the Lords, I used to be a member of the European Parliament, very interested in all the stuff that's going on in Europe. I still follow that very well. I was a member of the House of Lords in 2006. One of the great things about coming into the House of Lords at that time was that we started the climate change bill in the United Kingdom, which was really a trailblazer internationally, in that it called for a major economy, a G7 economy, to be net, to get rid of 80% of its production emissions by 2050. 60% originally, the government changed it to 80% on the way through, and of course we're now on net zero in 2050. And the great thing at that time was that there was huge support in both houses, House of Commons, House of Lords, from all political parties. It was one of the few times that you celebrated a unity of cause over something that was really important in terms of politics for the long term. So not often you do that. When you do it, celebrate it. And of course, moving on to net zero in 2019, I think, under Theresa May, was also moving that forward. But I think one of the great things was that then there were climate skeptics. Now there's very few. Are there any climate skeptics here in the audience? Can you put your hand up? We've got one over there. Any others? I think that's pretty representative of UK politics at the moment. There are probably, I don't know, 5% maybe of members of the Parliament, that are MPs, that are probably still rather sceptical about this area. But generally, politically, it's seen as something that we have to do. The difficulty is finding the route map that's politically acceptable, is voters won't be scared away, that is deliverable. That is the challenge, to have that route map, and that's one of the areas where the government has been taken to court recently by some of the climate change activists. And as we know, internationally, we still have a big problem. Although we have these COPs of various kinds, COP26 in Glasgow just over a year ago, which was seen as being pretty successful. More recent one in Egypt, not so successful. These jamborees internationally are carrying on. They have their targets from Paris of 1.5 degrees increase in climate. Very, very difficult to meet that. And of course, we've had an IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, produce its report earlier this month, I think last week, where the General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, said, he must have been at the Oscar celebrations, but he said, we now need everything, everywhere, all at once. And that's about it if we want to meet 1.5 degrees. Now, the UK, I'll talk about the UK quickly. I mean, we see ourselves as being pretty successful in that area. We've reduced our emissions on a production basis since 1990 on 45% roughly. But the main thing about, there is that political will here in the UK. As I said, the difficulty is finding the route map. What we're very good at is setting targets, and you're probably aware of a number of those, is that apart from the net zero by 2050, we're looking for a 68% reduction on that 1990 base by 2030. We want to completely decarbonise our grid by 2035, and that's where most of the action has been so far. We're actually saying we don't want any more internal combustion engine vehicles sold after 2030, except for hybrids up to 2035. And there's lots more of those. The one area where we have missing, and this afternoon I'm involved in the report stage of the energy bill, which is a major bit of government legislation going through at the moment, is the big hole there is around energy efficiency, building standards, all of that. The big political challenge is, well, two of them. One is buildings. We have one of the leakiest and one of the worst energy efficiency building stocks in the whole of probably worldwide, certainly in Europe. That's commercial buildings as well as homes. The other area of difficulty is persuading people to have different diets, and that's something apart from air travel also, which is issues which clearly are very difficult issues for politicians. But that one of building and energy efficiency is one of the ones where we have to get it right. We have to start soon. There's some work going on in that area, but frankly, it's not good enough and it's not strong enough, and that will have to change. What we did have in the United Kingdom, the government being not in any way sceptical, but wanting to look at all these climate issues in a different way. Recently sponsored what it called an independent review of net zero. It didn't use the Climate Change Committee, which is normally used for that area, headed up by a Tory MP called Chris Skidmore, and perhaps the surprise to all of us, maybe we shouldn't have been, was that he came out and said very, very strongly, we have to get on with this agenda, we have to get ahead of the curve. And the reason we have to get on with the agenda is not just around saving the planet and all of that stuff that we know we have to do, but actually because this is the future of our economy. This is the way that we're going to be. A low carbon, clean economy is what is going to happen. We need to be ahead. We need to do it now. And we're waiting. I think the government response to that might even be today. We can get quite depressed maybe about some of the carbon side, and I'm going to go on to some of the rest of the E bit in a minute. But I think it's really important to see signs of optimism as well. And what do we see around the globe? In the United States, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is $370 billion worth of investment in terms of the green area, a very big change around from the Trump regime, if you like, and with attitude to climate change. Although under Trump, coal production went down and down and down and down. We don't often hear about it, but there was quite a revolution even at that time. India is now engaged, one of the largest, probably will be the largest economy within this decade. Then they are at last getting engaged. China, the biggest amount of renewable investment is in that economy. They've overtaken us in terms of offshore wind as well. And I suppose one of the areas that makes me most optimistic is the fact that markets are actually working in the right direction as well, in terms of the plummeting costs of renewable energy, in terms of the cost of, electric vehicles will be less, certainly over life cycle they already are, but in terms of purchase will become less than ICEs very soon. And also, unlike maybe biodiversity, where I also get involved, in climate change we have all the technical means actually to do what we need to do. And if it's just that finding that way through, and perhaps democratically elected, and I can't talk, being a member of the House of Lords, being completely undemocratically and not elected, but having that courage again for leadership, perhaps, rather than just worrying too much about the details. Let me just go through just very quickly some of the other key areas of movement that we have at the moment. On environment, water is a big issue, whether it's rivers, whether it's sewage. You may have seen this, it's become literally and appropriately quite a toxic matter in terms of Parliament. MPs, members of the House of Lords, we are very, very focused following a very successful campaign by Fergal Sharkey in terms of cleaning up our Water Act. Clean air as well is now seen as a real killer in terms of the urban environment. So all of those are important to us in the E of ESG. Biodiversity and nature, we sometimes just forget about this other parallel crisis. The two are connected, climate change, biodiversity, they both need to be solved at the same time. But COP15 in Montreal at the end of last year, then the world agreed to have 30% of its water, its oceans and its land should be managed in a way that's sympathetic to nature. That's now a national target, and where I live down in Cornwall, it's also a local target as well. In terms of planning, then from November, it's this year, I think it's this year, maybe it was last, but anyway, biodiversity net gain. When you have a major development, then you have to have at least 10% of biodiversity net gain that comes out of that development. That's a major step forward. So then nature, there's that. Natural capital, quite a still contentious area, but believe me, that's something that's going to rise up as well in terms of our ecosystem services and all of nature that actually supports our economy. And I think that's one of the things that we're learning more and more is that nature and biodiversity and the moving away from the retreat of nature is fundamental not just to our environment, but to our economy as well in terms of those services that nature provides us. I don't know whether you've mentioned circular economy at all today. Believe me, it is something that is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's, again, another area where the European Union is moving perhaps ahead of ourselves. And remember, the circular economy, as opposed to the linear economy that we're all used to, is not just around recycling. It's around reuse, repair, shared ownership models, and shared use. All of that area, that is something you're going to have to look at more and more, including lifetime emissions in terms of products that you use. What else is going on? Just very briefly, adaptation. Let's never forget that. The longer we leave climate change to solve, then we have to sort out the mess through adaptation. That means making sure our buildings, our structures are resilient to flooding, to other forms of climate change, extreme heat, all of that side. And hopefully sometimes we can have nature-based solutions there, which I know were mentioned earlier on by Sue, in terms of how we solve some of those issues as well. I'm just lastly going to say two warnings, two areas of beware. One of those is greenwashing. And again, the EU is rather ahead of us at the moment in terms of legislation in that area. But there is going to be an increasing clampdown on bad use of saying that you're good at being green and being good on the environment. There are huge abuses at the moment that have been seen, and the regulations are after you. Certainly in the UK, the Competitions and Markets Authority have already started clamping down on this. The Financial Conduct Authority has its 6 principles. The Advertising Standards Agency has already been putting out quite strong fines in terms of wrong promotion of products, and we're promised a new consumer bill which will have big fines in that area as well. The other area of beware, I'm just going to say, is offsetting. Offsetting can sometimes, in terms of carbon emissions and in fact biodiversity, that can be good on occasions, but the track record of of offsetting is of very weak schemes that are very difficult to prove that they've actually benefited anything in the long term. The obvious ones being tree planting, where yes, you plant the trees, but you forget to look after them after you've planted them. And I would just beware of those two areas, greenwashing and offsetting. So, as Chris Skidmore MP said, this is the area in terms of the environment and moving forward. The UK and Europe are not Make America Great Again. They're not Florida. They're not Ron DeSantis. We have not got a movement against ESG from a doctrinal point of view, nor will we have one. Don't get your assets stranded. You can be a real major contributor to actually mending our planet, and I commend you for your determination to do that. Thank you, and any questions I'm pleased to take.
Well done, Robin. But I think the forestry point is a really important one. We don't plant trees. We plant little saplings that are this big, most of which don't grow. And as we saw quite recently, both from academia and The Guardian and Der Spiegel, 93% of them were found to be phantom anyway. The gold certified ones, the ones that are really, really good apparently. So it's a really dangerous thing. That's not to say offsetting per se in terms of the carbon capture, the carbon storage that Laura was talking about, quite different. So really important point there, thank you. Any questions for Robin?
Jonathan Lass, I'm part of the leisure hospitality team at a law firm called Ince & Co. As Lord Treverson, you mentioned the issue of cars and phasing out by 2030. As someone who's had an electric car for well over a decade, we'd be interested in your views as to how we make charging available to people who want to buy electric cars, and I expect some of them may be in Cornwall even.
Right, okay, no, a really good question, and something that I don't believe there's enough attention to. As we know, and you're probably in that position where you can charge on your own driveway or in your own garage or whatever, and of course, a large number of people that we're expecting to drive EVs do not have their own driveway, have to park on a road or on someone else's premises. And so we have to make sure that this is not another area of climate policy where we have discrimination between those that are well off and those that aren't. So there is an increasing amount of investment in vehicle charging. The thing that I find as a rural resident down there, as I said, in Cornwall, where I live, and I've been caught out on this in our EV, is that there are very few charging points rurally, and they're probably ones which take 24 hours to charge your car anyway. So this is one of the areas where a number of us are pressing government, Department of Transport, to actually improve this. And you're right, we are not there yet, and we have to shout loudly, if you want this to happen, and you want people to have that confidence, then you have to have those charging points. The only thing I would say quickly is that the majority of car journeys in this country are something like under 30 miles, and clearly for most people, range should not be a problem. The real challenge is those people that don't have access to their own charging points, and we have to make sure that they are not discriminated against in the amount of money they pay, or as they are at the moment, they have to pay VAT at the full rate, whereas on our home energy, we don't.
But it's a great example, I think, of the opportunity that all this provides as well. We have to re-engineer the whole infrastructure, the political infrastructure, the legal, everything has to be re-engineered. Well,
in the hospitality sector, and this is one of the things in Cornwall, everybody comes down for a holiday. If they drive down in their EVs and then can't charge them, they're dead. They don't come a second time. So it's really important in terms of the hospitality sector.
David?
Robin, you mentioned greenwashing. I hate greenwashing, but the biggest greenwasher I can think of in this country, by a long way, is local government. We've got the Mayor of London trying to bring in his ULEZ. If you read his own report, there's no health benefits and the air quality benefit is negligible. Where I live, there's a cycle lane that goes in that the council calls safer, but actually since they built it, the accident rate is up by about 600%. You've got low traffic neighbourhoods, which massively damage the economy, and they exploit a lot of ordinary people. So my question is this, and this is where politics and economics on this issue really get intersecting in a way that matters, because in my view, as you can hear from my question, I think these things are wrong. So what will you do to make sure that things that come in from government are, and this is the EEA mantra, commercially sustainable and scientifically robust, and this kind of exploitative greenwashing by government, so they're doing things to basically raise tax under the cover of being green, those things don't happen, and what we get is the right kind of incremental change.
Okay, let's concentrate on local government. I don't know those particular instances you talk about, but yeah, there should be absolutely, in terms of the public sector, there should be equal requirement to be truthful about your green claims, and I think that would be extremely healthy. And thank you for the thought on that. Okay. What is good is that a large number of local authorities, it's a very large percentage now, have declared climate emergencies, some of them also biodiversity emergencies. I think one of the problems we have generally, and I'm not, London is probably the exception, is that local authorities have little power or very reduced power these days, either in terms of budgets or in terms of being able to move away from national policy to be able to really do what they want to do. But also at the end of the day, I agree with you that everything that is done has to be commercially viable. But at the end of the day, also, this is going to be the future. So it's around investing in there, and maybe the short-term bottom line on all of it is not necessarily going to save you, but it has to be, certainly for SMEs, it has to be commercially viable in the short term as well.
One last question.
Yeah, a question. It's about, we heard about Scope 3 earlier this morning, and downstream in particular. Do you think hotels should be made accountable for the carbon emissions of their guests in their journey getting to the hotel?
Ah, well, that's an interesting one. Right. I certainly wouldn't think they need to be responsible for their guests' lifestyle generally. I wouldn't like to fill in the questionnaire even myself when I arrive at reception. But I think what there should be is certainly the means of travel to where you're coming to, then that probably is a factor in terms of emissions calculation. It would be quite a complicated area, but I don't think it is a free ride completely in that area, and it is up to the accommodation and hotel sector to facilitate low carbon ways to actually come to the venue. But in terms of accountability for all your guests, I think the privacy rules and laws would probably be very much against that, and I don't think I think it would be the worst thing probably happens to the hotel sector if we all had to declare our personal carbon footprints.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's terrific. Thanks very much.
Okay.